You've all heard the story. A ship's devastating defeat against an iceberg in a perilous encounter. Welcome to the Titanic, a triumph and tragedy.
Made in an effort of the White Star Line Shipping Company to keep up with their competitor, the Cunard Line, the RMS Titanic started its construction in 1909 and was completed on March 31st of 1912, exactly 3 years since it started construction. The Titanic set sail on its first maiden voyage on the 10th of April of 1912.
Saying that the Titanic was a technological marvel at the time is a massive understatement. The sheer amount of advances that were integrated into the ship certainly earned its place in history.
First on the list is why the Titanic was supposedly unsinkable. The ship was divided into 16 waterproof compartments, each equipped with electric doors below the deck that could be opened and closed to deal with flooding. If the ship was ever flooded, then the flooded compartment could be sealed off and the rest of the ship could continue on. In fact, up to 4 of the compartments could be sealed off and filled with water, and the Titanic would be fine.
Second, the Titanic was an engineering masterpiece, being the biggest man-made moving object of all time, as of 1912. It surpassed the RMS Olympic, which in 1911 was the largest ship ever. Even the building of it required over 15,000 men to create the ocean liner from the ground up. A total cost of $7.5 billion was required to build the ship, and it took more than 2 years to build.
Moving inside, the Titanic offered 3 different luxury classes. First class, very extravagant, located at the top of the ship with a total of 39 private suites. People in first class were granted access to veranda cafes, a smoking room, fine dining restaurants, a dining saloon, and a reading and writing room. Second class. Included in the second class were cabins with bunk beds. Each cabin was equipped with 2 or 4 beds. Private bathrooms were not offered, however, just private sinks and mirrors for each person in the cabin. The second class could fit 550 passengers, spread out through all the second level of the ship. Third class. Despite being worst of the 3 classes on the Titanic, the third class section of the Titanic was pretty luxurious compared to the third class sections on other liners. On the Titanic, third class passengers were given rice soup, biscuits, roast beef, and tons of fruit to eat, which was a significant improvement from other ships where third class passengers were supposed to bring their own food to last the whole trip. The Titanic offered third class to 1,000 passengers with about 10 people per cabin. Men and women rooms were separated with families sleeping in the middle, or together.
It sank, but why?
The simple story is that the Titanic sank because it hit an iceberg, a 3-foot growler to be exact. The Titanic had 15 bulkhead walls that separated it into 16 compartments. They were used to strengthen the hull of the Titanic, but the bulkheads were only watertight up to 10 feet. So when the Titanic hit the iceberg, the water was able to go above the bulkheads and go into the whole hull, sinking the Titanic. Next, in the engineering aspect of it, the rivets that held together the ship were bottom-of-the-barrel quality made of iron and steel. Why? So much money was spent on the ship's lavish interior that they couldn't afford to get better rivets. The steel rivets were put into the center of the ship, where the most stress was expected to happen. The iron ones are put on the front and back. Since iron doesn't stand up to water or icebergs very well, the ship was easily breached. Another, more humorous reason why the ship sank was that they had no binoculars. Really.
Actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. See, there were binoculars on board, but they were in a locked box. The man who had the key to the box, David Blair, had been reassigned to another ship before the Titanic set out, and the key was in his pocket. The replacement did not have access to the binoculars, making it harder to see at night. They could only see the iceberg once it was too late.
As one survivor later recounted, quote, "She went down straight. I saw the screws out of the water in the air. She went down perfectly straight. Put her nose in the water, and then when she disappeared, I turned and tried to come back. Where I thought she had gone down, in order to get a hold of a piece of wreckage, I remained there all night, and I was picked up in the morning by one of the lifeboats from the Titanic."
The fall of the Titanic was devastating. Because of safety and segregation issues, there were not many survivors. Only around 700 people survived the downfall, and a total of 1,503 people, including passengers and crew, died as a result of the sinking. The Titanic was vastly under-equipped. Lifeboats were supposed to hold 60 to 100 people, but most boats were lowered with as little as 30 people. Even so, there were not enough lifeboats, 20 to be exact, when it was supposed to house 64. Not only that, it was still a really nice $7.5 million cruise liner, around $175 million now, lost to the freezing depths of the Atlantic Ocean, along with all the work, planning, and execution on the creation and build of the Titanic.
Now, the failure of the Titanic wasn't a total waste, but it did mean that shipwrights had to redo their previous perfected design, and that ship safety regulations had to be rewritten and agreed upon by both the British and American governments. Immediately after the sinking of the Titanic, White Star made several changes to their existing ships to reinforce the design flaws that were assumed to cause the sinking, while others would begin to develop new technology in order to protect future passengers' safety. Meanwhile, the Radio Act of 1912, along with the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, was created to help improve on safety, especially with regards to keeping a constant communication among each passenger ship.
All in all, the Titanic remains as a constant reminder to the shipping industry. Safety is the priority nowadays, and for good reason. While the magnificent cruiser was certainly a triumph in terms of luxury and size at the time, due to its lack of lifeboats and adequate rivets, the wondrous Titanic was ultimately a tragedy.